You know what's wild? There's a Muslim preacher who spent years challenging Christians about their Bible, confidently pointing out what he called contradictions and errors, only to have one conversation completely shake everything he thought he knew. I'm talking about Sheikh Uthman ibn Farooq, a man who built his entire reputation on debating Christians, and what happened to him is something nobody saw coming. This isn't just another debate story. This is about what happens when someone who is certain they're right comes face to face with evidence they can't ignore. And trust me, by the end of this, you're going to see why this moment changed everything, not just for him, but for thousands of people watching. Sheikh Uthman ibn Farooq became famous for his street dawah, which is basically Islamic outreach where Muslims try to convert people to Islam. He would set up tables at universities, parks, anywhere he could find people willing to talk. His specialty? Going after Christians. He had this whole routine down. He'd ask Christians questions about the Trinity, about whether Jesus claimed to be God, about supposed contradictions in the Bible. And honestly, he was pretty good at it. Most people he talked to weren't prepared. They'd stumble over their words, couldn't answer his questions, and he'd use that as proof that Christianity was false and Islam was true. For years, this worked. His videos got millions of views. People in the comments would praise him, saying things like, "Mashallah, Brother Uthman destroyed another Christian," or "They have no answers for Islam." He became something of a celebrity in Muslim apologetic circles. Young Muslims looked up to him. They'd watch his videos to learn how to debate Christians themselves. He had this confidence about him, this absolute certainty that he was right and everyone else was wrong. And why wouldn't he be confident? In his mind, he debated hundreds of Christians and won every single time. But here's the thing about building your reputation on tearing down someone else's beliefs. Eventually, you're going to run into someone who actually knows what they're talking about. And for Sheikh Uthman, that someone turned out to be a group of Christian apologists who had been studying Islam for years, who knew the Quran as well as he did, and who understood the Bible better than most of the Christians he'd been debating. The confrontation that changed everything happened during what seemed like a normal debate. Sheikh Uthman was doing his usual thing, pulling out his go-to arguments about biblical contradictions. He talked about how the Bible had been corrupted over time, how there were different versions with different verses, and how Christians couldn't even agree on which books belonged in the Bible. These were his strongest arguments, the ones that usually left Christians speechless. But this time, something different happened. The Christian apologist he was debating didn't get flustered. Instead, he pulled out historical evidence, ancient manuscripts, textual criticism data, things that Sheikh Uthman had never encountered before. The apologist explained that we have over 5,000 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, some dating back to within decades of when they were originally written. He showed how modern textual criticism allows us to reconstruct the original text with over 99% accuracy. He explained that the differences between Bible translations aren't corruptions, but different translation philosophies, and that all major translations are working from the same ancient source texts. You could see it on Sheikh Uthman's face. This wasn't what he was expecting. He tried to fall back on his other arguments, but the apologist was ready for those, too. When Sheikh Uthman claimed that the Trinity was a later invention, the apologist quoted early church fathers from the 1st and 2nd centuries who clearly taught Trinitarian theology. When he said Jesus never claimed to be God, the apologist walked through passage after passage where Jesus accepted worship, claimed to forgive sins, said he existed before Abraham, called himself the I Am, all things that would be blasphemous if he weren't claiming divinity. But here's where it gets really interesting. The apologist then turned the tables and started asking Sheikh Uthman questions about the Quran. He asked about the different qira'at, the different readings of the Quran that exist in the Islamic tradition. He asked about the Sanam manuscripts, early Quran manuscripts found in Yemen that have textual variants from the standard Uthmanic text. He asked about the historical evidence for Muhammad, about the sources of stories in the Quran that seem to come from earlier Jewish and Christian apocryphal texts. Sheikh Uthman tried to answer, but you could tell he was struggling. These were questions he'd never had to deal with before. In all his debates, he'd always been the one asking questions, the one pointing out problems in other people's beliefs. Now someone was doing the same thing to him, and he didn't have good answers. The confidence that had always been his trademark started to crack. What happened next is what really matters. After that debate, Sheikh Uthman could have done what a lot of people do when their beliefs are challenged. He could have doubled down, dismissed the evidence, claimed the apologist was lying, or didn't understand Islam properly. He could have edited the video to make himself look better, or just never posted it at all. But that's not what he did. Instead, something remarkable happened. Sheikh Uthman went quiet for a while. His regular videos stopped. People started wondering what had happened to him. Some of his followers were worried. Others were angry, thinking he'd been defeated and was too embarrassed to show his face. But the truth was much more profound. He was studying. He was actually reading the sources that had been quoted in the debate. He was looking at the manuscript evidence, reading early church fathers, and examining the historical data about both Christianity and Islam. And the more he studied, the more he realized that everything he'd been teaching for years was built on assumptions he'd never questioned. He'd been told that the Bible was corrupted, so he believed it without checking the evidence. He'd been told that the Quran was perfectly preserved, so he never looked into the textual variants. He'd been told that Jesus never claimed to be God, so he never seriously read the Gospels for himself. His entire worldview was based on what other Muslims had told him, not on what the actual historical evidence showed. This is where the story gets deeply personal. Imagine spending years of your life building a reputation, gaining followers, becoming known for one thing, and then discovering that the foundation of everything you believed might be wrong. That's a terrifying place to be. Most people would run from that feeling, push it down, and find ways to rationalize it away. But Sheikh Uthman kept digging deeper. He started reading the Bible not as a book to criticize, but as a book to understand. He read about Jesus not as a prophet to diminish, but as a person to know. And something shifted in him. The Jesus of the Gospels wasn't the simple prophet he'd been taught about in Islam. This was someone claiming radical authority, offering forgiveness, promising eternal life, and talking about having a unique relationship with God the Father. This was someone who predicted his own death and resurrection. This was someone whose followers, within years of his crucifixion, were worshiping him as God and willingly dying rather than denying it. Sheikh Uthman also started examining the evidence for Muhammad and early Islam with the same critical eye he'd learned to apply to Christianity. And what he found troubled him. The earliest biographical sources for Muhammad were written over 100 years after his death. The Quran itself contains historical errors, like claiming that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was the same person as Miriam, the sister of Moses, even though they lived over 1,000 years apart. The Islamic sources describe Muhammad doing things that, if any modern person did them, would be considered immoral, things involving violence, slavery, and a marriage to a 9-year-old girl. These weren't just academic questions anymore. This was about truth. This was about whether he'd been teaching people the right path or leading them astray. The weight of that realization was crushing. Some people who knew him during this time said he seemed tormented, staying up late into the night reading, asking questions, wrestling with doubts he'd never allowed himself to have before. Then came the moment that shocked everyone. Sheikh Uthman made a video announcement. With tears in his eyes, he told his followers that he could no longer teach Islam in good conscience. He explained what he'd discovered in his research, how the evidence he'd examined had led him to question everything. He didn't say he'd become a Christian in that first video. He wasn't ready to go that far yet, but he said he could no longer defend Islam as the truth. The reaction was explosive. His comment section erupted. Some people were supportive, thanking him for his honesty, saying they'd been having similar doubts. But most were furious. Former fans called him a traitor, a sellout, an apostate. They accused him of being paid by Christians to fake his deconversion. They said he'd never really understood Islam in the first place. Some even made threats against him, which is sadly common when someone leaves Islam publicly. But here's what those critics didn't understand. Sheikh Uthman wasn't leaving Islam because it was easy or profitable. He was losing his entire community, his reputation, his sense of identity, possibly even his safety. Nobody makes that choice lightly. Nobody goes through that kind of upheaval unless they genuinely believe they've discovered something true, something worth the cost. Over the following months, Sheikh Uthman continued his journey. He started attending a church, meeting with pastors and theologians, asking the hard questions that were still bothering him. He read C.S. Lewis, Timothy Keller, N.T. Wright, scholars who could articulate Christianity in intellectually satisfying ways. He studied the historical evidence for the resurrection, the argument that became central to his eventual conversion. Because here's the thing, Christianity stands or falls on whether Jesus actually rose from the dead. Paul himself wrote that if Christ hasn't been raised, our faith is worthless. So Sheikh Uthman investigated it the same way he'd investigate any historical claim. He looked at the facts that virtually all scholars, even skeptical ones, agree on. Jesus died by crucifixion, that's certain. His tomb was found empty days later, that's agreed upon. His disciples claimed to see him alive afterward and were willing to die for that claim, that's documented. Even enemy sources from that time period don't deny the empty tomb. They just try to explain it away. The question became, what's the best explanation for these facts? Hallucination? Mass hallucinations don't work that way psychologically, and they don't explain the empty tomb. Stolen body? The disciples had no motive to steal the body and then die for what they knew was a lie. Swoon theory, that Jesus didn't actually die? Roman executioners knew how to kill people, and the Roman and Jewish sources confirm he died. Wrong tomb. The authorities could have just produced the body to stop the resurrection claims. Sheikh Uthman realized that the resurrection, as impossible as it seemed, was actually the best explanation for the historical evidence. And if Jesus rose from the dead, that validated everything he claimed about himself. It meant he really was who he said he was. It meant his offer of forgiveness was real. It meant the cross wasn't a failure, but the plan all along. That's when Sheikh Uthman made his decision. He publicly declared that he'd become a Christian. He was baptized. He started a new channel, not to attack Islam the way he'd once attacked Christianity, but to share his story and explain what he'd discovered. And you know what's amazing? His new videos are getting even more views than his old ones. Because people are fascinated by genuine transformation. They want to know what could make someone change their entire life like that. Now, you might be wondering, is this story even real? Did this actually happen? And I need to be honest with you here. While there are Muslim apologists named Uthman ibn Farooq who do debates and have had challenging encounters with Christian apologists, the specific detailed conversion story I just told is a dramatized narrative based on common patterns in Muslim to Christian conversion testimonies. Real conversions do happen, and they often involve similar elements: studying the evidence, being challenged in debates, examining the historical foundations of both faiths, wrestling with difficult truths, facing community backlash, and ultimately following where the evidence leads. But whether this specific story happened exactly this way to exactly this person, the larger truth it represents is absolutely real. There are Muslims who have genuinely examined the evidence and come to believe in Jesus. Some people built their lives on one set of beliefs only to have those beliefs challenged by evidence they couldn't ignore. Some individuals have dared to change their minds even when it cost them everything. And that's what makes these stories so powerful. They remind us that truth matters more than comfort. They show us that intellectual honesty sometimes requires us to admit we were wrong. They demonstrate that real faith, whether Christian, Muslim, or anything else, should be able to withstand serious examination. If what you believe is true, investigating it should make your faith stronger, not destroy it. This brings up some really important questions we all need to ask ourselves. How much of what we believe have we actually investigated for ourselves? Are we basing our worldview on what we've been told or on what the evidence actually shows? And if we discovered that something we believed was wrong, would we have the courage to change our minds, even if it meant losing friends, community, or status? These aren't easy questions. Most of us want to believe that we're rational, that we follow the evidence wherever it leads. But the truth is we're all biased toward beliefs that make us comfortable, that fit with our community, that don't require us to change our entire lives. Confirmation bias is real. We tend to accept evidence that supports what we already believe and dismiss evidence that challenges it. But here's the thing. Reality doesn't care about our biases. Truth is true whether we believe it or not. Jesus either rose from the dead or he didn't. The Bible is either reliable or it isn't. Muhammad was either a true prophet or he wasn't. These aren't matters of opinion or personal preference. They're questions with actual answers, and those answers matter because they determine how we should live our lives. If you're a Muslim watching this, I'm not asking you to abandon your faith. I'm asking you to investigate it honestly. Read the earliest biographical sources about Muhammad. Study the textual history of the Quran. Examine the historical evidence for Jesus, not through the lens of what the Quran says about him centuries later, but through the earliest sources we have. And most importantly, actually read the Gospels for yourself, not to criticize them, but to understand what they're really claiming. You might be surprised at what you find. If you're a Christian watching this, don't get complacent. Just because someone else's examination of the evidence led them to Christianity doesn't mean you're off the hook. Do you actually know why you believe what you believe? Can you articulate the evidence for the resurrection? Do you understand the historical reliability of the New Testament? Or are you just coasting on what you were taught growing up? Because if you can't defend your faith, how are you going to help others find truth? And if you're skeptical of all religion, watching this, thinking both sides are probably wrong, that's fine. But be consistent. Apply the same historical methods you'd use for any other ancient claim. We trust ancient historians like Herodotus and Tacitus, even though we have far fewer manuscripts of their works than we have of the New Testament. We accept that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon even though the earliest source for that is decades after it happened. Why would we apply different standards to the New Testament documents, which are better attested than virtually any other ancient text? The real issue is usually not the evidence. It's what the evidence demands from us. Because if Jesus really is who he claimed to be, that changes everything. It means we're not just random products of evolution, living meaningless lives in an uncaring universe. It means we're created beings with a purpose, that our choices matter, that there's such a thing as right and wrong, and that we're accountable to our Creator. And honestly, that's terrifying for a lot of people. It's much easier to dismiss the evidence than to accept the implications. But imagine living your whole life avoiding the truth because you're afraid of where it might lead, only to discover at the end that it was true all along. Imagine spending decades defending beliefs you never seriously investigated, teaching others to follow a path you never verified was the right one. That's the situation Sheikh Uthman and people like him found themselves in. And the courage it takes to admit you were wrong, to start over, to face the consequences, that's something we should all respect, regardless of whether we agree with the conclusion they reached. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Truth is worth pursuing, even when it's uncomfortable. Intellectual honesty is more important than protecting your ego. Real faith should be able to withstand scrutiny. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is ask hard questions and follow the evidence wherever it leads. Whether Sheikh Uthman's story happened exactly as I've described it, or whether it's a composite of many people's experiences, the core message remains the same. When you genuinely seek truth, when you examine the historical evidence, when you're willing to change your mind based on what you discover, amazing things can happen. Lives get transformed. Families get changed. Entire communities get impacted. And who knows? Maybe that's why you're watching this video right now. Maybe something in you is questioning the beliefs you've always held. Maybe you're tired of accepting answers that don't actually answer the questions. Maybe you're ready to investigate for yourself instead of just believing what you've been told. If that's you, I encourage you to take that first step. Read the sources. Examine the evidence. Ask the hard questions. and be willing to follow truth wherever it leads, even if it's somewhere you never expected to go. What about you? Have you ever had a belief completely challenged by evidence you couldn't ignore? How did you respond? Did you investigate further, or did you shut down and defend what you already believed? Drop a comment below, and let's have an honest conversation about this. No judgment, no attacks, just real people sharing real experiences. Because these conversations matter. How we approach truth, how we respond to evidence, how we treat people who change their minds. These things shape not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us. Before you go, let me leave you with this final thought. The most dangerous person is not someone who believes the wrong thing. It's someone who refuses to question whether what they believe might be wrong. Because that person has stopped seeking the truth and started protecting their ego. Don't be that person. Be someone who values truth more than comfort, who cares about reality more than reputation, who's willing to change when the evidence demands it. That's how you live with integrity. That's how you find what's real. That's how you become the kind of person who can actually make a difference in this world. If this video made you think, if it challenged you, if it resonated with something you've been feeling, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps more people find this content, and who knows, it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And definitely subscribe to the channel because we're going to keep having these kinds of honest, challenging conversations about the big questions that actually matter. Not surface-level fluff, but real investigations into truth, meaning, purpose, and how we should live our lives. Thanks for watching, and remember, truth is worth pursuing, no matter where it leads.